So let's go through the basic analysis. That's what we're here for. The core diagram is going to be a labour market diagram with the wage on the y-axis and the employment of labour on the x-axis. We assume here we have a free market wage W1 with employment level of E1. If we now impose a minimum wage, I'll take you over to the right hand side of my diagram here. Key point is that a minimum wage is a pay floor, and for it to be set and have any effect on the market, it must be set above the normal prevailing wage for a particular occupation. So we've set the minimum wage here at MW. There it is, there's our pay floor. Officially the wage can't fall below it. Consequence normally is that the supply of labour expands. More people are willing and able to work at a higher wage. But it could also be the case that the demand for labour from employers could contract. So labour supply could expand to E3, labour demand could contract to E2, and as a result you could lead to an excess supply of labour. Now, just to develop the analysis a little bit, the impact of a minimum wage does depend on two things. One is where you set the minimum wage. So in my example on the left hand side, I've set the minimum wage a little bit above W1, and we've created an excess supply, and there's been quite a substantial fall in employment here. So the key is where you set it. How high is the minimum wage relative to the normal market? And the other neat bit of analysis to add into your answers is it depends on the elasticity of demand for labour. In other words, how responsive are businesses in terms of their employment decisions following a change in the minimum wage. Now, what I've done here is I've drawn my labour demand curve as fairly inelastic. Perhaps, for example, labour costs were a relatively small percentage of total costs. Perhaps it's tough to replace labour with capital. Perhaps there's only been a short time frame for businesses to adjust to the minimum wage. And perhaps businesses are cutting costs elsewhere rather than cutting employment, as we've hinted at. Now, I've drawn my labour demand curve as inelastic here. The minimum wage is here, above the equilibrium. More people want to work, E1 to E3. But notice here, if the labour demand curve is inelastic, we see a smaller fall in employment. A smaller fall in employment. And that's going to have a consequence for the total earnings of workers at the minimum wage. This is the wage to get paid, that's employment. So the total earnings will be that rectangle area. Key analysis point is that the elasticity of labour demand affects the extent to which employment falls if we impose a minimum wage above the free market wage. So analysis, please, is important. Analyse first, then evaluate. The impact of a minimum wage depends on how high the minimum wage is, and crucially the elasticity of labour demand, because that's going to affect how many workers keep their jobs post